Hello and welcome to another episode of Speaking. By now, all our viewers are conscious of the fact that this is a podcast that is about historical events, historical entities, and people who've made an impact, events which have influenced the way we are today. Today, I have a very special guest, someone I admire a great deal, senior journalist and author Anija Chaudhary. Ma'am, thank you for taking out time and coming to my podcast. It's a great honor. Ma'am is the author of the best-selling book called How Prime Ministers Decide. It is a very engaging book in every respect. It is available online and in stores, and by now in almost every airport in this country. So do get your hands on the book. Ma'am, I have many questions about the book and the characters that you have discussed. But one of the first questions that I have is with your introduction, ma'am. You describe it as very lonely at the top. Why?
First, Aishwarya, thank you for having me and for your kind words. I do hope also that your viewers will get hold of the book, because when I thought of writing this book, I really wanted the younger people to read it.
Yes,
And I thought I must write it in a way which captures their attention.
yes, ma'am.
Because politics is all about drama, suspense. It's not about poetry and beautiful prose.
Yes.
So I've tried to portray the story in that way. I don't know whether I've succeeded or not, but certainly I enjoyed it. And I decided to write on this very subject because, having covered politics as a media person for decades, I felt this was an area how the prime ministers decide. You and I think, everybody thinks a prime minister is very powerful. He or she can do anything.
Yes, ma'am.
But that's not the way things are. There are so many contending pressures, lobbies at work, domestic, international, competing pushes, caste, religion, the prime minister's own inclination, personality, the baggage he or she inherits, the historical context, which all go to make that decision and which can affect millions and millions of people. And the reason why I started the book with The Lonely Top is because their decision affects generations. And that must be a very awesome thought to be with. So, whichever of the prime ministers I interviewed, I asked them this question. And I found all of them admitting how very lonely the top was. We know you run a TV channel. You know at the head of it what it entails.
Yes,
So the CEO of a company, the buck stops there. The head of a government, the buck stops there. But I think in India, the prime minister is even more powerful, more seen as the my bap than perhaps other democracies also. And I asked myself this question, why? Apart from the loneliness, why this? Loneliness, of course, VP Singh said it was very lonely in a very personal sort of way. Because you couldn't go and visit your family, you couldn't go and play golf if you wanted, you couldn't go and visit friends because it was so demanding. So also Gujarat, so also Chandrasekhar was seen as a dhakar prime minister who you thought didn't need people. He was surrounded by courtiers all the time, but he admitted. And of course, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he said, the higher you get, the lonelier it becomes. Yes. And he said, I sometimes used to think, have I come into the wrong profession? Should I have remained a poet? But the two people, I would say three people, who put their loneliness to good political use was Nehru, Indira Gandhi, and Narendra Modi. Nehru, because when he was in jail and long years, he wrote books. Discovery of India for his daughter, letters that he wrote to her. Indira Gandhi, because it created a certain enigma around her personality.
Yes, ma'am.
A mystery around her personality. So people couldn't get a measure of her. And she would often doodle on a piece of paper when people went to see her. She made up her mind about them, but they didn't know whether she would say yes, no, how she would react to things. And of course, Narendra Modi has, made loneliness into a political point that he gets across. We see Air India One when he comes down the steps. You never find an official minister behind him. It's Modi coming down alone. South Africa when he traveled in a train, Japan when he traveled in a train. Pictures that the PMO put out or his media team put out, but Modi alone. Even in an underpass he inaugurated not far away, it was Modi alone. In the Kedarnath cave, Modi alone. In front of the Sardar Patel statue, Modi alone. And I think somewhere giving the message, Mehuna, I'm there for you. Don't worry. So I think loneliness is a very interesting aspect of a prime minister's life and functioning. So I wanted to start with that.
Ma'am, I noticed about Indira Gandhi's chapter. Most of the books that I've read on Indira Gandhi, they start with her achievements. Either she's swearing in, being sworn in as the prime minister, or she's contesting her election. Yours starts with that low point in her life when she loses that election. Was it a deliberate move, ma'am?
Yeah, Aishwarya, I've looked at not just prime ministers. I've looked at specifically a decision made by 6 prime ministers.
Yes, ma'am.
And I looked at the pulls and pressures, how they made that decision.
Yes.
Now, for Indira Gandhi, I had to choose what decision. So much has been written about the emergency.
Yes, ma'am.
So much has been written about the creation of Bangladesh, how she dealt with that whole thing, with Pakistan, with America. So I thought the decision which continues to tantalize many people even today is, why did she go in for elections in 1977 and lose? She didn't have to do it. The emergency was on. She was fully in charge and in control of the situation. There were no sanctions from the Western world. Of course, many of her old friends were unhappy that Nehru's daughter, Democrat Nehru's daughter, should take a step like that of the emergency, which had abridged fundamental rights. So why did she go in for it? So that decision is what I wanted to look. And even more important, how did she in 39 months alone, bounce back to power with a record majority, which she had not got earlier, even in 1971, in a heyday. So how did she do that? And the Sam Dam Dand Bhed that she'd used, and the role that Sanjay Gandhi, her younger son, she was grooming as her successor, the role he played. Because during the emergency, he was the authority, unconstitutional authority behind the throne.
Yes.
And was considered responsible for her losing that 1977 election because of enforced sterilizations, which made minorities very unhappy, and they didn't vote for her in 1977. But in 1980, if there was one person responsible for her comeback,
it was
Sanjay Gandhi. And how he strategized, Aishwarya. It's a fascinating story of real politics, of the nature of power, and how she understood, Mrs. Gandhi understood power. I quote in the book somewhere that Banarsi Das, one of the UP politicians, had gone to see her. And it was when Chandrabhan Gupta was the chief minister, a very powerful chief minister, who was turning against her and towards the old guard of the party. And she, without looking up at him, he was there, and said to him, "Tell C.B. Gupta, my father was a saint, I am not."
Chandrabhanu Gupta, I know.
So she understood the nature of power and she wielded power. And I think Sanjay Gandhi also, maybe cynically, the use of power, as I say, Samdam Dandabhed, weaning away Raj Narayan from the opposition side. Raj Narayan was the one who
brought her down.
In 1975, when she was disqualified in the case he launched against her for electoral malpractices. 77, he defeated her. in the Lok Sabha elections, that Raj Narayan became her one-person demolition squad to demolish the Janta government.
Ma'am, you speak of Indira's younger son in that sense. But what about Rajiv Gandhi when you say you've called him the secular prime minister who undermined secularism? Now, ma'am, when prime ministers take decisions and you've observed them in such great depth, ma'am, do you think they are consciously thinking of the fact that is this particular decision of mine going to undermine secularism in any way? What if I open the locks? Where does that put me or my party? Do you think they think like that, or is it, ma'am, a decision which is taken regardless of that, or is the situation that demands it? Because that doesn't that those lines are really blurred, ma'am.
You know, when you're in the thick of it,
Yeah.
you've got to take quick decisions.
Yeah.
But Rajiv Gandhi vacillated a lot. Initially, the reason why I say that,
Yeah.
give that title.
Yes.
Rajiv, when he became prime minister, he was 40, youngest prime minister India's had. And he was very futuristic, wanted to take India into the 21st century. You remember the technology mission, brought down the voting age to 18. So many things, that he did which were looking ahead.
Yes.
Anti-defection law within months.
Yes.
He's the one who brought that. But it is not the new India that got him down. It was the old India, caste, religion, and the hold it exercised on the psyche of Indians. That is what he couldn't cope with. So you had this case, Shah Banu case, very famous case, 1985, within months of his taking over. These kind of cases happen all the time. There'll be judgments like this today, all over the country.
Yes.
A Muslim woman, divorced, husband will not pay her maintenance, she goes to court. And the court, under the CRPC, not under the Muslim personal law, says maintenance be given to her. Kitna tha? 179 rupees per month. And the Muslim community was up in arms. They saw it, they hit the streets as never before. They saw it as interference in their personal law.
Yes.
And the other thing they were reacting to is the court made observations of the need and the usefulness of going in for a uniform civil code, which the minority community was very agitated about. Now, this I'm talking of, in the mid-80s.
Yes, ma'am.
And that story continues till today.
Today, yeah.
So he tried to, what they called appease. Appeasement is a word that entered the political vocabulary at that time. That he brought in a law to undo that judgment, and the law, it negated the judgment. It was called the Muslim Women Bill, to make the Muslims happy. Now the Hindus were up in arms that Rajiv, who had come to power with an unprecedented 414 Lok Sabha seats.
Yes.
Nobody else has touched that figure so far. That how could he appease the minority community? So Arun Nehru, who was in his government and as a confidant of his at that time, suggested that he get the locks at the Babri Masjid, which had been put there in 1949. Get them open, Hindu bhi khush ho jayega, Muslim bhi khush ho jayega. You will deal with the situation. So he got that done through the courts, but it's a very interesting story which I've documented in great detail, how the court actually gave that judgment. The Doordarshan cameras were outside to capture it for posterity. When the locks were opened, rusty locks were opened within minutes.
Yes.
So everybody was ready for it. But neither the Hindus were pleased nor the Muslims were pleased.
But ma'am, I have a question. Can we say, and some people do say, that Rajiv got a historic mandate, which nobody's touched that figure, but he squandered it?
I think, as I said, Rajiv was politically naive. The people, of course, his own thing, he was Western oriented, Western educated, as I said, forward looking, didn't have time for caste. By the way, when Vishwanath Pratap Singh went in for the Mandal decision to give 27% reservation to the OBCs in government jobs, Rajiv was the leader of the opposition at that time, 1990. And in the September of that year in Parliament, he gave a 2.5-hour speech opposing reservation. He said, today Rahul Gandhi is asking for a caste census.
Yes.
He wants the level of reservations for the OBCs, SC, STs to be maintained or, to be increased and for
Yes.
them to get their due.
Yes.
His father spoke very differently
Yes.
and said it would lead to caste wars in the country. And I saw an article, an interview that he'd given where he used the word buddhuon ko kaise denge. So Rajiv's thinking was this is not the way to go. Merit had to be honored and they had other ways had to be found. And so he was thinking very differently. And this conflict of caste versus religion, then the BJP played the religious card. They undertook a Rath Yatra, Mr. Advani, from Somnath to Ayodhya, but was arrested on the way in Bihar by Lalu Yadav. And the BJP withdrew its support to the Vishwanath Pratap Singh government. But so when you ask about Rajiv was well-meaning, sincere, but politically naive and relying on people. That was a shifting population of advisors who, whether they gave him the right advice, whether it was his own. I mean, there are a lot of theories on all this.
But ma'am, for the public, the Prime Minister doesn't have the luxury of being politically naive.
Yes, he doesn't.
He doesn't. And
but
that's...
Rajiv, then you see, came to power suddenly. If there was an accidental prime minister, it was Rajiv Gandhi, because in the morning he was campaigning in Bengal. By 7 o'clock that evening, after his mother's assassination, he'd taken over as prime minister.
Yes.
So he was not prepared for it. He'd been general secretary of the party. When he came, he fought the election in 1981 after Sanjay Gandhi's sudden death in a plane accident. He himself said, I've come into politics to help mummy. So he was a reluctant politician and had very little experience. Probably he was a pilot, very easygoing, and suddenly in 1984 is catapulted into a position to run a country as diverse as India.
But ma'am, in all your stories, and I mean in all majority of the thing, do you think it comes out that any of them were prepared to be prime minister? Because you never know who's going to be prime minister.
That's true.
Yeah.
Vishwanath Pratap Singh, no. So they had been, he'd been positioning himself, VP Singh. Indira Gandhi, yes, when 1966 she took over. And at that time she thought, after Shastri's death, even then she thought she might become the foreign minister. And her kitchen cabinet turned out later to be a kitchen cabinet, I.K. Gujral and others. They looked at each other that night and said, foreign minister, she has a chance to be prime minister.
Yeah.
She became.
Yeah.
So yes, even that was surprising, though she would have been also angling for that. Rajiv Gandhi, as I say, it's accidental.
Ma'am, Narasimha Rao?
Narasimha Rao who had the experience.
But ma'am, not the preparation. He never knew he was going to be prime minister. That's
when Rajiv died, was assassinated, he was in Andhra Pradesh. Narasimha Rao बोरी बिस्तर बांध के चले गए थे, उनको टिकट नहीं मिला था. And he thought that was quits now. His books had already been sent to Hyderabad, but he'd gone, campaigning. And suddenly his secretary Ramu Damodaran had called up and said this thing had happened. Rajiv had been assassinated while in Tamil Nadu, Sri Perumbudur. And he rushed back. But when he came back, then his eyes were absolutely on the possibility of him becoming prime minister.
But ma'am,
senior most.
What do you feel in the character of Narasimha Rao? Did he get that inkling that he could get the job? Because Narasimha Rao was nowhere.
Aishwarya, every single senior politician
wants to be
would aspire to get to the pinnacle of power. Yes. I would be very surprised that there may be some who think, no, my limitation is this, that's how far I will go.
Yeah.
But anybody ambitious and out there dynamic, will want to, given half a chance.
Yeah.
And Narasimha Rao had been there for ages. It's very interesting.
Yes.
At the launch of my book last August, Rajdeep Desai was anchoring that panel discussion. And at the end of the discussion, he suddenly sprung this question to the panelists: who do you think was the best Prime Minister of India? And Sharad Pawar, who's very reticent, very circumspect, measured in his words, said 2 words: P.V. Narasimha Rao.
Nice. My absolute favorite. Yes.
For him, and he said it publicly.
Yes.
Of course, it made headlines the next day. But many people feel that Narasimha Rao did not get his due while he was still alive.
Yes.
And there were reasons for that. And the reasons were his differences with the Gandhi family. And the one big blot was allowing the Babri Masjid to come down, to be demolished when he could have. Many people, his party felt he could have prevented it. And to this day, the discussion goes on. Was he complicit in that decision? Or did he just allow it to happen once it had started, thinking this is a festering sore in Indian politics, let it go? Or that, which of the two theories people subscribe to? Again, I've gone into that.
Ma'am, but in that, I'll just like to ask you, when event of the kind of enormity that the demolition had is happening, ma'am, do you think, and that comes back to the prime ministers and what we think of them as powerful people who could stop the demolition or who could do this or do that. Ma'am, are they actually, in that sense, are events always in their control?
No, events are not always in their control. That is correct. But given the way the situation was developing, and his own OSG,
yes,
Khandekar, has said that once the Kar Seva was announced,
yes,
and the talks broke down, which is October of 1990. Was it? Yeah. No, it was announced, October. That Narasimha Rao knew that he may not be able to stop the demolition. And RSS people and BJP people claim, and I quoted them, that they had alerted him that this is what they were going to do and to get ready for any eventuality. Now, for his own reasons, Narasimha Rao did not choose to go in for Article 356, go in for President's rule, even temporarily, till the situation had settled. And he chose to look the other way or allowed it to happen for whatever political reasons. And the damage done, he controlled the situation during his term as Prime Minister. Because the mandir went on the back burner.
Yes.
While he was PM.
Yes.
But it gave and filliped to the Hindu nationalist forces as possibly nothing else. Though Rajiv Gandhi Shah Banu response was also something that gave a fillip to those forces. So Narasimha Rao, who calmed down the temperatures in the country, when he took over, Kashmir was burning, Punjab was burning, he calmed those things down, held elections in Punjab. He, the Soviet Union had gone, Russia had taken its place, it was a unipolar world, and he planned for that. He reached out to East Asia, he reached out to the Central Asian republics. He was looking ahead as a Prime Minister, quietly, very uncharismatic in an election. Jairam Ramesh described him as charismatic as a dead fish. I've seen him, campaign, I've gone with him when he campaigned in the election, and people would just start to walk out. But very erudite, spoke many languages, understood India, understood the Congress system. So, but the balance, allowing Babri Masjid to be demolished, was not just a disused mosque coming down. It was a signal to the Muslims of India that the state and the constitution would not protect their fundamental right. And that was a big dhakka for them. So I think when you look at the pros and cons of what he did, how history would judge him. His own party judged him very harshly, because when he died, his body was not even allowed to come into the Akbar Road headquarters of the Congress party. The gates were shut. So people, congressmen were not, and women were not allowed to pay their last homage also. The party leadership felt so strongly about what he had done. So, and even his last days in hospital, this is, I believe, something that continued to agitate him.
He was also the one who said that indecision is also a decision. Indecision is also a decision. That's what
people say he deterred. And he would take, he won't take a decision on certain things. But he had said more than once, non-decision is also a decision. And those who knew him well, those who worked with him closely, would say he was not indecisive.
Yes.
When he wanted to decide, he could decide in minutes. You remember when he took over, even before he was sworn in as Prime Minister, hours before, the bureaucrats had gone to him and said, this is the state of the economy, this needs to be done, we need to go and liberalize, we need to go to the IMF and World Bank, get help, and these are the conditionalities. And he signed on the dotted line.
Yeah.
Something, mortgaging of gold, something that Chandrasekhar had balked at.
Yeah.
You remember he'd said, when the decision was taken, that he had to sign those files. He said, Balia ke log bolenge hamara sona bech diya. And he was very irritated. But Narasimha Rao, even he was not an economist, he took those hard decisions when he took over as Prime Minister. Even Manmohan Singh, who he got as Finance Minister, was tentative in those early months. It's later that he became confident and took the process forward. But it was Narasimha Rao. So to say that he was indecisive on things he didn't want to decide, or wanted
to just like
or not to decide.
Yes.
When it was a no,
yes,
then it became a non-decision. That's his way of dealing with the situation.
Ma'am, I come to interesting prime ministers who I feel and who I get through your chapters also who've not got their due in that sense. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh. It's like almost like because Manmohan Singh was succeeded by Narendra Modi, it's always going to be that kind of an comparison. And it's not fair to him because the Prime Minister ought to be judged on his reign. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee also, some people are in the party, his own party, are not very comfortable with some decisions he took or the lack of decisions. Also. So, what do you think of these two prime ministers, ma'am?
I must tell you this. When the book came out, I asked to see Dr. Manmohan Singh. I wanted to present him a copy. So he called me, and there was a book lying on his table. He said, I've read it already. And then he turned to the title of the chapter. An underrated prime minister who triumphed. And he really liked that title.
Yes.
So he felt, I think, that the decision I had looked at and scrutinized, where he comes across not as a weak prime minister,
but prime ministerial.
He asserted his authority on the Indo-US nuclear deal. He did not let go, Aishwarya.
Yes.
Those months, where George Bush, the US president, and he saw that deal through. Now, that was opposed by Sonia Gandhi, sections of the Congress party. The left was propping his government in power. They were against it. He managed to get Samajwadi Party on board, which had been against the deal.
Yes.
So he also, he had a killer instinct as far as this decision was concerned. So he did, he just would not let go. And he had his way. He had his way. The deal was signed. Now, that was a side of Manmohan Singh that did not manifest itself in any other decision. Sonia Gandhi was half prime minister during the UPA rule. So that was interesting side of Manmohan Singh that came to the fore in this one decision. As for Atal Bihari Vajpayee, what is very interesting is how did this person who came through the RSS BJP ranks, at that time Jan Sangh ranks, and he and Advani launched the BJP in 1980 after the Janata Party collapsed. How did he come to be seen as the quintessential moderate
Yes.
in a right-wing party like the BJP, and Advani, the hawk. Advaniji used to often say this, we've come through the same processes, but I'm viewed as a hawk and he's seen as the moderate.
Yes.
And I think it is his parliamentary career. He was essentially a parliamentarian.
Yes.
And his across the board relationships. He had a marvelous relationship with Atal, with Narasimha Rao. They were good friends. They came to each other's rescue on many occasions. That also is a very interesting story in the book. But I often say this, that when you look at Atal Bihari Vajpayee's tenure as Prime Minister, and I have looked at the nuclear tests that he conducted, which had been ready, which was there ready for him to do by Narasimha Rao, and Narasimha Rao briefed him and said, "Aap kar lijiye, everything is ready." Apart from that, and he didn't see this as his main achievement, he saw his efforts to resolve the Kashmir tangle as his achievement, though it did not succeed. But it's not so much what he did as Prime Minister. His legacy is what he was, which was, as I say, a moderate, which is a moderate who believed that India should be run by a consensus, a country as diverse as India.
But
I
ma'am,
think
that
that is his legacy.
But ma'am, that brought him a lot of brickbats within his party.
Of course.
And
brickbats within his party. He managed to ward off those pressures of the RSS,
yes,
of L.K. Advani,
Sudarshan
ji, who got him to change the finance minister even before he was sworn in.
Yes.
And from 2002 onwards, he gave in to various things then. I think the old Vajpayee was not seen.
Why is that the case, ma'am?
I think he saw there was just too much pressure coming his way. Things were not going well. So he made Advani the deputy prime minister. He agreed to the Sangh's demands, and then agreed to Advani and other leaders of the party coming to him and saying that the elections in 2004 be advanced by many months.
Yes.
They thought that, they would be able to win at that moment and Advani will become the prime minister after him. But they lost. And of course, Vajpayee moved into the sunset and Advani could never become prime minister.
So, ma'am, my final question to you is, at the end of writing this book, do you actually conclude that the Prime Minister of India is viewed as an extremely powerful individual, but has to be seen very differently and evaluated on very specific instances, maybe fair, maybe unfair? Like Narendra Modi would be evaluated on many specific instances in his career, Nehru in particular. So, ma'am, do we view them as very, very powerful individuals because the persona is very overwhelming? Or is it they're just individuals at the end of the day?
No, the Prime Minister of India is a very powerful being. Even a Prime Minister in a coalition government, so-called weak Prime Minister, is very powerful, given the powers they exercise.
Yeah.
But I think I would not categorize a Prime Minister as good or bad.
Yeah.
There are the good decisions, there are flashes of wisdom, there is, as I say, decisions that represent the underbelly, the ugly underbelly of Indian politics, to which all of them, have subscribed to. So one has to judge them by decisions. What was the good, what was the bad, what was the contribution, what was not the contribution. Narendra Modi also. Now, it'll be interesting to look at his decisions. Demonetization, abrogating of 370, so many other things. But he's different from any other previous prime minister. And at the end of the day, he's brought about a paradigm shift in Indian politics. Like him, don't like him, agree with him, disagree with him.
Yes.
And I think that's the case with all prime ministers. And I think at the end of the day, what is very exciting is how they have shaped and contributed to the maturing of our, what I call, incredible democracy.
Yes.
For all its fault lines, it is an incredible democracy still.
Yes.
So I think that is the story. And so far, how the prime ministers thought, how they decided, not much had been written. Lot had been written on the prime ministers. So I wanted to, as I've said, lift that veil that little bit to give people an insight into how this works.
Well, ma'am, you've done a great job at it, and congratulations on your book. And
Thank
thank
you.
you very much for joining us on this podcast. Thank you for taking out time.
Thank you.